You've been performing since childhood, smiling when it hurt, apologizing just to be safe. But what if the pain you feel today isn't about what she did, but what you did to survive her? This video is not kind. It's not safe. But it might be the most honest thing you've ever heard. Since you were little, you were taught to look outward, to search for someone to blame, to put a name and a face on your suffering. And yes, many times that name is your mother. But here's what no one dares to say. It's not your mother who still holds you back. It's what your mind did with her. No, this isn't an attack. It's not about blame. It's a truth so uncomfortable. Very few dare to name it. Because the mother doesn't just live in your memories. She lives in your unconscious. Long after she's left the room. Long after you thought you moved on. Long after the world said, "It's time to grow up." You wake up, brush your teeth, go to work, smile, on cue, laugh when it's expected. You keep moving, keep trying, keep performing. But deep down, there's something you can't name. A quietud, a pulse beneath the surface. You think you've healed, that the past is the past. But look again. Really look. Are you truly free, or are you still living to be seen by someone who no longer sees you? There's a shadow that follows you. Not outside, but within. It speaks when you speak. It loves when you love. It shrinks when you try to grow. And you know this shadow. You felt it in every relationship, every rejection, every time. You can't explain why love feels so unsafe. It whispers things you stopped questioning long ago, that you must earn your worth, that your needs are too much, that something is wrong with you. And it all began with someone you were told to trust unconditionally. Mother. But the pain you carry now, it's not about what she did. It's about what stayed, what was absorbed, what was never processed. Carl Jung called it the mother complex. A pattern, a prison, a myth that haunts you because you were never allowed to question it. And as long as that archetype remains unexamined, it becomes a god. One you worship in silence, by erasing yourself. But what if the story could change? What if healing doesn't come from confronting her, but from reclaiming you? This is not a story of blame. It's a story of return. To the child you were, and the self you buried. To the voice you silenced, and the truth you swallowed just to be loved. So here's your first act of rebellion. Stop pretending you're fine, because you're not. You're carrying a childhood no one helped you carry. And I warn you, you won't leave this video as the same person who entered. There's a child inside you, not a memory, a presence, living, breathing, waiting for something that never came. A voice to say, "I see you. I'm here. You're safe now." But that voice never arrived. Not in the way you needed. Not when you were most fragile. So you adapted. You shut down. You held your breath. You became quiet. Invisible. Good. Because being good felt safer than being real. You thought silence would protect you. You thought shrinking would keep the love from leaving. But love left anyway. And so did your voice. You flinch when a voice sharpens. You shut down when love feels distant. You overreact not because you're dramatic, but because no one ever taught you what safety feels like. Carl Jung warned us. What is not made conscious will return again and again as fate. And this is where fate began. In a house where love was conditional, where peace meant being quiet, where silence was called respect, and discipline pretended to be love. Maybe your mother was overwhelmed. Maybe she smiled but never truly saw you. Maybe she meant well. But meaning well is not the same as being present for a child who's afraid. Because a child doesn't analyze. A child absorbs. And what you absorbed was absence, control, emotional, unpredictability. And so, you made one brutal conclusion. It must be me. I must be the reason this hurts. I must not be lovable. That belief became your compass. You grew up, but inside, you're still that child trying to earn love from people who don't see you. You overachieve. You overgive. You over-apologize. You call it responsibility. But deep down, it's reenactment. The child inside still waiting for the hug that never came. And now here's the cruel twist. You became the one who withholds it. You now speak to yourself the way no one ever should. You minimize your pain. You dismiss your needs. You betray yourself just to make others feel safe. Because, deep down, you still believe love must be earned. That rest must be justified. That peace is only for the perfect. But the one you're waiting for will not arrive. Not through your mother. Not through a partner. Not through the world. The only one left to hold that child is you. And that is not a tragedy. It's a turning point. Carl Jung said, "You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become." So become the one you once needed. Not perfectly. Not all at once. Just present. It starts with a question. When I'm hurting, do I abandon myself the way I was once abandoned? Or do I stop and stay? Because that child doesn't need solutions. It needs presence. It needs someone to finally say, "I'm not leaving. Not this time." That's not self-help. That's reparenting. That's sacred. You can't change the past, but you can change how the past lives inside you. So go back. Not to relive it, but to rewire it. Not to blame, but to reclaim. You don't have to fix the child. You just have to hold them, exactly as they are. No more performing. No more proving. No more pretending you're fine. You're not fine. You're carrying a childhood no one helped you carry. But now you can. So place your hand on your chest. Take a breath and whisper, "I see you. I believe you. I'm here." Because the moment you stop waiting to be held and start holding yourself is the moment your healing truly begins. If this part touched something in you, if it gave words to the ache you've carried in silence, then don't just watch. Support. Share this with someone who still thinks they're the problem. Like the video if your chest softened. Subscribe if you want more work like this. And if you feel called to help us keep creating, you can support the team with a super thanks. Your presence here means more than you know. You've heard it all your life. She did her best. She sacrificed everything. She was always there. And maybe all of that is true. But truth has layers. And sometimes, what's true on the surface is hiding something far deeper. Let's name it. There's a myth we were all handed, too sacred to question. The mother myth. She's kind. She's pure. She's selfless. She never fails. And if she does, you're not supposed to notice. You're supposed to forget, to forgive, to make excuses, to keep loving. But that myth is not love. It's a prison. Because when you're not allowed to speak the truth, you start swallowing it. And eventually, you drown in silence. You don't just lose your voice. You lose yourself. Because you were taught that honoring her meant erasing you. But what if the most dangerous form of abandonment is self-abandonment in the name of love? Maybe your mother meant well. Maybe she believed love meant control, or distance, or constant advice, or criticism in the name of care. That doesn't make her evil, but it doesn't make your pain disappear either. Because pain doesn't ask, was she trying her best? It only asks, where were you? When I needed to be held, Carl Jung reminded us. The archetypes we idealize become the shadows we fear. And the more perfect we paint her, the more we shrink ourselves. You love her. Of course you do. But love without boundaries is not love. It's fusion. It's emotional erasure. If you still can't speak your truth around her, if you still tiptoe through every conversation, if your throat tightens every time she enters the room, you're not in relationship. You're in worship. And worship leaves no room for reality. You bring her flowers, smile on her birthday, tell yourself she did what she could. And maybe she did. But every year, some part of you dies a little because the love still feels incomplete. You crave a mother who doesn't just appear but sees, who doesn't just provide but accepts, who doesn't just teach but listens. And when she doesn't, you blame yourself. Not because it's true, but because the myth leaves no one else to blame. So here's the break. She wasn't a goddess. She wasn't a villain. She was a woman, with wounds of her own, with ghosts she never faced, with love that may have been real, but still left you cold. This isn't about vilifying her. It's about reclaiming you. Because idealization is just another form of distortion, and distortion prevents healing. You can't love her clearly until you see her fully. You can't forgive her truly until you release the fantasy of who you hope she would become. And that hurts, because it means grieving a mother you never really had. But in that grief is your power. Because once you stop waiting for the perfect mother, you stop betraying your imperfect self. And in that space, you finally say, she was not everything I needed, but I am no longer in need of everything. That's where wholeness begins. Not in her perfection, but in your permission to feel what was never allowed. You don't need to protect the myth. You don't need to maintain the image. You don't need to whisper your truth as if it's shameful. You get to speak it. You get to feel it. You get to leave the altar and walk into your own life. Because honoring her isn't about shrinking yourself. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs to worship pain to stay loyal. And that, right there, is the beginning of emotional adulthood. There's a voice inside your head. You hear it every day. But you rarely stop to ask, where did it come from? And why does it sound so certain it tells you you're lazy, that you're behind, that you should be stronger, more grateful, more perfect? It shames your sadness, mocks your joy, interrupts your peace at the exact moment you start to feel safe. And the cruel part is, you think it's you, but it's not. It's a recording, an old script, a voice you inherited, and you've been pressing play every single day. You weren't born with that voice. You learned it, absorbed it, from glances, from sighs, from corrections disguised as care, from silences loaded with disappointment. It's the sound of the first mirror you ever looked into. And that mirror was your mother. Not always her words. Sometimes her absence. Sometimes the tension in her body when you cried. The way she praised you only when you performed. The way she said, be strong, when what you needed was to be held. She didn't have to say much. You felt it in the air. And your body never forgot. Carl Jung vant. When an archetype is not integrated, it becomes your internal ruler. Unseen, but absolute. The inner mother. The voice that judges you before anyone else can. That punishes you before the world even has a chance. So now, you don't just remember her. You become her. To yourself. You silence your needs. You push through exhaustion. You criticize your feelings. You shame your softness. You demand perfection from a soul that is already tired. And the worst part, you don't even know you're doing it. You call it discipline. You call it accountability. You call it being an adult. But it's not maturity. It's repetition. The child, still waiting to be loved, now playing the role of their own oppressor. This is how trauma hides. Not in visible wounds, but in internalized voices, in the way you speak to yourself when no one's listening. You say things in your mind you would never say to someone you love, but you say them to you, over and over again. Why? Because you still believe that love must be earned. That being hard on yourself will somehow protect you from being hurt by others. But it doesn't. It only deepens the wound. And the saddest part, you've grown so used to it, you think it's normal. But that voice is not truth. It's trauma. It's not strength. It's self-abandonment. And every time you deny yourself rest, every time you minimize your pain, every time you betray yourself to make someone else comfortable, you're not just repeating the past. You're living inside it. So now, you have a choice. Not to destroy the voice, but to recognize it, to listen not with obedience, but with curiosity. Ask it, who are you? Whose voice are you repeating? What are you trying to protect me from? And you may hear something unexpected. A whisper that says, I'm just trying to keep you from being abandoned again. That's the root. The terror of being left, of not being enough, of being too much. But you're not too much. You're just unheard, unheld, unseen. That voice is not your enemy. It's a ghost, a survival reflex, the child's attempt to stay safe in a house that didn't always feel safe. But you're not that child anymore. You're not in that house. You're not at the mercy of someone else's silence. You have power now. The power to speak differently, to respond instead of react, to soften instead of punish. It starts small. In the moment, you feel shame and choose compassion. In the moment, you fail and choose support over self-attack. Carl Jung said, "We don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This voice is your darkness, and by looking at it, not running from it, you dissolve its grip. So next time it speaks, don't fight it, but don't follow it either. Pause it, breathe, and speak back. I hear you, but I choose differently now. I am not your child. I am my own voice. And that right there is how the pattern breaks. Not by silencing the voice, but by replacing it with something truer, something kinder, something whole. You were drafted into a war before you could speak, before you even knew what you meant. A war without explosions, without blood, but one that left scars deep beneath your skin. It wasn't a war you saw. It was a war you breathed. You entered it as a child and you never left. Because no one told you it was happening. No one told you that surviving love would come at the cost of yourself. This is the war of unmet needs, of invisible rules, of silence in place of comfort, of fear in place of safety. And so, you adapted. You became small, still, strategic, hyper-aware, because somewhere along the way, you learned that being seen meant being judged, that needing meant being punished, that crying meant being left alone. So you buried the need, you buried the fear, you buried the longing, and you kept the performance. And now, here you are, an adult, still living as if the war is happening. You panic when someone pulls away. You flinch at rejection. You over-explain your truth. You apologize for existing. You fear stillness because your nervous system doesn't recognize it as safety. It thinks stillness is a setup. Because here's what no one told you. Your nervous system doesn't know time. It doesn't care that the war is over. It only knows patterns. And your pattern was survival. Carl Jung knew. The unconscious doesn't disappear. It waits. It repeats. Until you look at it. So now, every reaction, every shutdown, every panic spiral is not just about today. It's about yesterday, and the day before that, and every day you needed love but got distance instead. You live in a present still dictated by a childhood you've never emotionally left. This is the real war. Not between people, but between your past and your possibility. Because your past still whispers its rules. Don't cry. Don't ask. Don't rest. Don't take up space. Don't make them uncomfortable. And you follow them. Not because they're true, but because they're familiar. But you're not 5 anymore. You're not in that room. You're not locked in that dynamic. You don't have to vanish to be loved. But your body doesn't know that yet. Your instincts still scan every room for danger. Your chest tightens at softness. Your joy feels like a setup. Your peace feels suspicious. And you wonder why you're always tired, but not the kind of tired sleep can fix. This is soul tired. Survival tired. The fatigue of decades spent holding your breath. Because surviving was never meant to be permanent. And yet, here you are still holding the pose. Still in armor. Still performing strength, when what you need is permission to collapse. But what if I told you you're allowed to leave the war, that you don't need to earn peace? That you don't need to justify rest? That you don't need to keep bleeding to belong? You are allowed to stop fighting. But to do that, you must make a new choice. A choice to notice. To pause. To say, this feeling is old. This fear is familiar. But I am not there anymore. That's how you disarm the war. Not by force, but by presence. By breathing instead of running. By noticing instead of numbing. By staying when every cell tells you to flee. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And you've been calling this fate for far too long. But it's not fate. It's memory. A memory trapped in muscle, in breath, in belief. And memory can be rewritten. You don't have to fight anymore. You don't have to shrink. You don't have to prove you're worthy of staying alive. You get to live. You get to rest. You get to exist without permission. And when you do, when you stop reenacting the war and start choosing peace, that's not weakness. That's revolution. Some inherit houses. Some inherit land. And some inherit silence. Heavy silence, woven into the nervous system, tied around the soul like an invisible rope. Not spoken, not written, but passed down like a secret everyone feels but no one names. You carry things that didn't start with you, fears that don't match your life, shame that doesn't belong to your timeline, guilt that's older than your memory, because pain is inherited, not just through stories, but through energy, through behavior, through glances, through absence. Carl Jung understood. We are shaped not only by personal experience, but by ancestral memory, what they couldn't feel. You were taught to suppress what they couldn't name. You learned to silence. And now, you wear their grief like armor, not because you want to, but because no one ever took it off. You think it's your sadness, but it's not. It's your mother's heartbreak, your grandmother's silence, your lineage's grief living in your lungs. And the cruel part, you believe that carrying it is love. You shrink your joy, not out of humility, but out of fear. Fear that if you become too free, you will betray them, that your healing will dishonor their suffering. But that's not loyalty. That's imprisonment. You are not here to bleed for their wounds. You are here to end what they never could. And that takes more than love. It takes courage. Because to heal is to risk being misunderstood by the very people you're trying to honor. It's standing alone in choices they were never allowed to make. It's becoming what they never saw modeled. But understand this. Their pain is not your home. Their patterns are not your blueprint. Their limitations are not your destiny. You are not their savior. You are their continuation. And in that continuation, you get to evolve. You get to end what they didn't even know had begun. And yes, that may feel like betrayal. Because your body was trained to associate belonging with pain, that's the emotional inheritance. Not just trauma, but the belief that to love means to suffer with them. That if you thrive, you're disloyal. That if you surpass them, you've abandoned them. But survival is not the same as love. And repeating suffering doesn't redeem it. The greatest act of love is not to echo their wounds, but to break their rhythm, and that begins with asking the forbidden question, what part of my pain was never mine to begin with? Who are you still carrying? Whose voice lives in your hesitation? Whose sorrow rides on your shoulders? When you try to feel joy, you weren't born with these shadows. You inherited them. Unseen, unspoken, but not unbreakable. Here's the shift. You can carry the weight, or you can carry the wisdom, because pain can end with you, not by pretending it never happened, but by finally naming it. Say it aloud. This ends with me, not out of bitterness, but out of love. Love, big enough to choose differently. That's what evolution looks like. Not lightning. Not applause, just small, consistent acts of emotional clarity. Acts like choosing presence over performance, rest over guilt, boundaries over sacrifice, compassion over shame. You don't have to give your children what you didn't have, but you can give them what you're learning now. Not approval, not perfection, but presence, freedom, emotional safety. That is how you become the ancestor who heals the bloodline. Not by being flawless, but by being awake. You are the bridge between what was and what will be. And when you finally set down what was never yours, you will feel something you didn't know you were missing. Lightness. Breath. The first inhale that belongs to you. You made a promise. Not with words. Not with a ceremony. But with silence. A silent pact formed in the shadows of your childhood. It went like this. If I stay small, you'll love me. If I don't speak, you won't leave. If I carry your sadness, maybe you'll finally smile. You didn't know you were making it, but you did. Because you were a child, and children don't negotiate. They adapt. They survive. So you became the peacemaker, the strong one, the invisible one, the one who never asked for more. And that role became your identity. And now you're exhausted. But you don't know why. Because your body is still keeping that promise. A promise to protect her, to keep her happy, to never let her feel what you felt growing up. And so, you repeat it. In relationships, in workplaces, in friendships, you say yes when you mean no. You carry weight that's not yours. You minimize your pain so others can feel safe. You call it kindness, but really, it's loyalty to a pact you never consciously chose. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate." This is one of those rulers. Hidden, powerful, built on love, but fed by fear, Because the pact was never about truth. It was about survival. And now it's time to question it. Here's the brutal truth. Your unconscious believes that if you surpass your mother, you betray her. That if you heal in ways she couldn't, you're disloyal. That if you become free, you leave her behind. It's not rational. It's emotional. It's visceral. It's wired deep inside your system. You grew up learning that your identity was tied to hers. That what she suffered, you must also suffer. That if she didn't get peace, you shouldn't either. It's as if your soul whispered, "Mom, I'll stay in pain, so you're not alone." But that's not love. That's self-erasure, because what your mother couldn't do wasn't your fault, and your freedom doesn't hurt her. It honors her. But to break that pact, you must face grief. The grief that she may never see you, never understand what you carried, never see. You were enough all along, and that hurts. But in that grief is your liberation. Because once you stop being her protector, you become your own. Once you stop carrying her sadness, you finally feel your joy. But to do that, you have to speak to yourself. And maybe one day to her, "I love you, but I won't shrink for you anymore. I care for you, but I won't silence myself to make you comfortable. I see your wounds, but I will not wear them." That's not betrayal. That's maturity. Because you are not the child anymore. You are not responsible for holding the family system together with your silence. And when you break that pact, yes, it will hurt. Yes, it will feel like death, because part of your identity will dissolve. But what grows in its place is real love, real voice, real peace. Carl Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child can bear is the unlived life of the parent, and you've carried her unlived life long enough. Now, you get to live yours. So take the pen, rewrite the contract, sign it with truth, and walk away. Not from her, but from the version of yourself that had to disappear to be loved. Because real love doesn't ask you to disappear. It asks you to return, fully, finally, home." You promised yourself you'd never become her, that you'd never speak that way, never hurt people like that, never disappear into silence the way she did. But one day in stress, in fear, in love, you hear yourself, and it hits you. The same tone, the same sigh, the same sharpness that used to slice into your skin now slips from your own mouth. And for a moment, you don't know who you are. This is the mirror, the unconscious inheritance, not just through DNA, but through mimicry, through survival, through absorption. Carl Jung warned, "What you do not make conscious, you will project. And sometimes you don't project it outward. You project it inward, onto yourself. You didn't become her out of choice. You became her because your nervous system coded her as the blueprint for closeness, for power, for identity. Even if her love came wrapped in shame, even if her care was control, because the child in you learned one thing: this is what connection looks like. So you repeated it. You became the same inner critic that once crushed you, the same absence that once left you aching. The same coldness you once feared now lives in how you treat yourself. And here's the hardest truth. You did it because part of you believed that becoming her would help you understand her. And maybe it did. Because now you don't just remember her, you embody her. And in doing so, you finally see why she couldn't love you the way you needed. She was drowning in her own unmet needs, in her own unprocessed grief, in her own inherited pain. And you were collateral, a mirror she couldn't look into without seeing everything she lost. So now, You face the mirror, and you have a choice. You can shatter it, denue, erase it. But Jung warned, repression only strengthens the shadow. The real work is not rejection. It's integration. You are not her, but she lives in you. And pretending otherwise only deepens the split. So speak to her. Not to the woman from your childhood, but to the energy inside you now. Say, I see you. I know where you come from, but I won't carry you forward blindly. Because awareness is not betrayal. It's reclamation. And when you stop fearing the reflection, you start changing it. Every time you pause before repeating that old pattern, you rewrite the script. Every time you choose softness over criticism, you shift the lineage. Every time you stay present instead of disappearing, you break the cycle. This is how healing looks. Not like light beams, not like spiritual breakthroughs, but like choosing, again and again, to speak differently, to hold differently, to love differently. You are the mirror she never dared look into. You are the voice she never heard. You are the mother she couldn't become because no one showed her how. So, become it. Not out of revenge, but out of restoration. You don't need to prove her wrong. You just need to prove that love can look different. That love can be kind, can be calm, can be safe, can stay. And when you do, when you offer that to yourself, to your child, to the people around you, you stop being her reflection and start being your own. No one tells you that healing feels like loss. That becoming whole means first becoming hollow. You think it will feel like light, like freedom, like joy. But the truth is, it often starts with grief. Grief for the years you lost. Grief for the love you begged for. Grief for the child inside you who waited too long for a hug that never came. Because healing requires death. The death of illusions. Of identities built on survival. Of masks you wore just to feel seen. Carl Jung called it individuation. The process of becoming who you truly are. Not who your mother needed. Not who your culture praised. But the soul buried beneath all those performances. And that process is not clean. It's not pretty. It's not linear. It's raw. It's ugly. It's lonely. You will cry without knowing why. You will rage at people who never hurt you. You will tremble not from fear, but from everything your body is finally releasing. This is not regression. This is rebirth. But rebirth hurts. Because the version of you that kept you alive must die. The pleaser, the overachiever, the fixer, the one who never cried, the one who always smiled. You wore them like armor. And now, you're taking them off. Piece by piece. And underneath, there's no applause, only silence. Because no one sees this transformation but you. There are no witnesses to your most sacred unraveling. Just you, and the grief, and the truth. The truth that you cannot go back. That the old version of you is gone, and with it goes the fantasy. That one day, they'll change. That one day she'll apologize. That one day you'll be loved the way you always dreamed. Let that fantasy die. Let it burn. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. Because holding on to hope that someone will become who they never were is a prison made of love. And grief is the key. Let yourself feel it. All of it. The sadness, the tenderness, the fury, the disbelief. Because this is your final goodbye to a version of life that was never fully yours. And once you let it go, there is space. Space to breathe, to rebuild, to choose. But this time from truth, not from trauma, not from performance, not from wounded loyalty, from clarity. Carl Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And now, you understand. This isn't punishment. This is purification. And the ache in your chest, that's your soul stretching into a bigger shape. That's not breakdown. That's expansion. And one day, not today, but one day you will look back and realize you were not falling apart. You were finally coming home. So cry, shed, collapse. Because after the death comes something holy, not a new you, but the real you, the one that never got to exist until now. At the end of it all, there is no big moment, no applause, no ceremony. No one claps when you heal, because healing is invisible. It's in the silence you choose instead of shouting, the breath you take instead of blaming, the hug you give yourself when no one else knows you're breaking. This is the moment you become what you always needed. Not for anyone else. For you. You become the mother you were waiting for. Not in body, but in energy, in presence, in tenderness. You stop chasing her. You stop waiting for her. You stop needing her to change. And instead, you become her. You hold your fear the way she never held yours. You soothe your sadness with the words you never heard. You stop abandoning yourself when you feel too much. You stop silencing yourself when you feel afraid. You stop demanding perfection from the child inside you who just needs rest. You start listening, not to fix, not to silence, but to love, and slowly your inner world changes. The child inside, who once flinched at every noise, now starts to relax. The voice that once whispered, "I'm too much," now says, "I'm okay." That is everything. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because it means no more chasing, no more earning, no more pretending. Just being soft, being afraid, being flawed, being alive, and still being worthy. You become your own sanctuary. You parent your panic. You cradle your Ks. And when the world ignores you, you stay. That's what a mother does. And now, that's what you do. You don't shame yourself for not being perfect. You don't abandon your joy just to feel accepted. You don't shrink. You don't beg. You don't bleed just to be loved. You love. Without transaction. Without performance. You love like oxygen. Like breath. Like life. And maybe no one taught you that. But now, you teach yourself. You show up. Every day. In small ways. In sacred ways. You build a home inside yourself where pain is allowed but not in control. Where fear is heard but not followed. Where the past is honored but not repeated. You break the cycle. Not just for your children, but for your soul. This is what it means to become the mother you needed. You stop asking who will save you. And you realize you already have. You became the safety you never had. The nurture you were always denied. The presence you waited your whole life to feel. And from that place you create not just life, but love that doesn't hurt. That doesn't disappear. That doesn't demand. You erase yourself to earn it. You create love that stays. And that is the miracle. You were never broken. You were conditioned. Programmed to believe that your worth depended on how little space you took up, how much silence you could swallow, how perfectly you could perform a role that was never yours. And now, you're waking up, not into a fantasy, but into the truth, that your pain made sense, that your shame was learned, that your survival wasn't weakness, it was brilliance. You've seen the pattern, felt its grip, carried its silence, and you, chose not to pass it on. That is a revolution. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And now you're claiming that privilege, not through perfection, not through pleasing, but through presence. You no longer need to be rescued, to be validated, to be understood by those who never understood themselves. Because now you understand. You know who you are without the masks, without the roles, without the pact to keep everything together while falling apart inside. You no longer owe anyone your suffering. You are allowed to outgrow what wounded you. You are allowed to be free. Even if they never were, you are allowed to love yourself in ways no one ever did. And that love, that presence, ripples outward into generations you will never meet. So take this moment not as an ending, but as a remembering. You were never just a child of pain. You were always a seed of power. And now you bloom. In silence. In softness. In strength. The cycle ends with you. Say it. Mean it. Live it. I am the end of the pattern. Write it below if you feel it in your chest. Not for me. For you. For the child still watching inside you, wondering if it's safe to speak. Tell us, what part of your pain was never really yours? If this video cracked something open in you, share it. Not for numbers, but for those who are still stuck in silence. And if you feel called to help us continue this journey, you can support the team with a super thanks. Your presence makes these videos possible. Subscribe. Not to follow us, but to follow you. The part of you that refused to go numb, the part that chose to feel instead of perform. And now, go. Not to seek, but to stay. To stay with yourself in ways you never thought possible. Because the greatest act of love is not saying I'm healed. It's whispering, I'm here. May the world tremble when you stop abandoning yourself. See you in the next video. Or maybe not. Maybe you'll be too busy rebuilding your soul. Either way, I'm glad you made it this far. To here, to you, to now.